Okay, so we are now recording. Welcome back, everyone. This PowerPoint is available under the Module 2 folder in Canvas. So I want to do just a quick check-in. Something I wanted to just mention, grading is done for now. I chimed in on the discussions. I did see that I think someone had already turned in the annotated bibliography, which you are way ahead of me in a rock star and stuff like that. But I had provided feedback to everyone about their part one of the annotated bibliography. So if you have any feedback or questions about my feedback, like please let me know. I'm happy to expand on that or clarify. If I can help you find sources or anything like that, let me know. I think for a lot of folks, I was just trying to give direction on how to narrow their topic or things like that. So, like I said, just let me know. And then this week's readings has been a really robust conversation so far about land grab institutions and things like that. So I'm just curious about what folks took away, what the takeaways were, what was new, what was maybe surprising about the readings. It doesn't just have to be the land grab universities. It could be about the Harvard, the group of students at Harvard, or any of them really. Anyone?
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
I was going to say that I thought it was very interesting. I had some familiarity with land acknowledgement statements prior to this and how it's more of a recent movement with a lot of universities examining their histories and starting to include them on their websites or in other public areas. But I thought it was really interesting. I think it was South Dakota State University that they said redirected income to support Indigenous students and their scholarships to come to the university. So I thought it was interesting because a lot of our readings have related to not just acknowledging the history, but how that acknowledgement can eventually turn into action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I know I shared, Sam had asked, if there was any examples of a land grant institution like paying any sort of reparations. I shared, the Florida State example with the Seminole tribe. I don't consider that reparations at all. I mean, if nothing else, it's almost like, copyright, name, image, and likeness type a financial, like it's literally to me the very least that the university could do, and not much more than that. But it is an interesting financial situation going on there. Certainly. Yeah, that land grab institutions article I just find fascinating every time I read it.
It is a really interesting article. I think it opens up a lot of conversations about how universities should be moving forward while acknowledging what has taken place already.
Yep. Yep. So, and I know that the question in that, at least I started the discussion with this week. I mean, some of the questions I'll ask in these classes are big questions that are not necessarily answerable or beyond what maybe one person or one group could do. But I think that they are critical conversations to have. And to show the way that institutional histories really matter. So great. Thanks, Kyla. Was there anything else that folks wanted to add about the readings? Anything that stuck out to them?
Hello.
Hi, Timmy. How are you?
I am pretty good. I'm just cooking dinner right now, so it's good night.
Good.
I think one thing that stood out to me was in the Patel text talking about how universities use like diversity as like an advertisement thing.
Yes.
Like kind of just turning students who are not white are becoming like a commodity for universities, which I think goes hand in hand with like the exploitation of the labor of people of color at universities. And so it's just like seeing that position in the way, like I've heard that critique before, and Madeline and I read a book in another class from an author named Sarah Ahmed, who.
Oh yeah. Did you read on being included?
Yes.
Yep.
So seeing that connected in this text with settler colonialism, I think just helps kind of like bring that, because I think in that text I read it more as like a, you know, white supremacy, anti-blackness kind of critique, and then just to kind of bring that into settler colonialism to be like, okay, yes, this is part of how this engine works, kind
Yeah.
of like it was. I just thought it was good that it was in there.
Yeah, you know, a text that I didn't require for this class that I thought about and then just didn't is a book called Ebony and Ivy. It's written by Craig Wilder. And you know, something that he talks about is how colonization and slavery have really gone hand in hand in the formation of and the foundation of higher education and in the earliest universities. And I think that I kept the Harvard text. I think that Wilder's book, one, it's a pretty dense text. It's long, and quite honestly, it's really depressing read, but it's a very important read. If this is something that you're interested in, I would definitely recommend that book. But yeah, you know, these ideas around equity, diversity, inclusion are just interchanged, and really, yeah, I agree. To me, it is pretty depressing, but these ideas of settler colonialism, you know, oppression and things like that are just interwoven into the fabric of these institutions. And it's, you know, if you pull on one thread, other things are going to unravel as well. So, yeah, this isn't always the most uplifting class, but it's also a very important class for sure. All right, so if there's anything else that you want to share, we can throw it in the chat or what have you. But so tonight, you know, with working with primary text as a historian, I do just want to talk about this. This might be something that you're familiar with, it might be something you're not familiar with. And so I think that my purpose here is to give you just sort of a primer on the different kind of texts that you can think about using and incorporating into your work, whether that be just for the final project for this class or in moving forward, maybe thinking about your dissertation and things like that, or your master's thesis, capstone, what have you. But you know, generally speaking, historians are interested in working with primary sources. And so this little chart here talks a bit about primary sources versus secondary sources. So firsthand accounts, interviews, or things like that. The oral histories, you know, stuff that you might think about with autobiographies or biographies. So accounts of the people who actually lived there or lived through whatever it is that you're studying. Diaries, texts, writings that are not necessarily fictionalized, but like nonfiction or autobiographical accounts of someone who experienced a specific event. You know, that within history, the understanding or the assumption really is that even if somebody is 90 years old and they're writing about something that they did when they were 10, that the time that has passed and the perspective that they might have doesn't necessarily make their account 80 years any less true or not. You know, so I think that with education or in having like a really positivist mindset that well, if time passed and you're a different person, you were a kid then, now you're an adult, I think historians are not going to be too concerned with that. They're still going to treat a person's perspective as valid, and then with that they'll try to engage in say triangulation activities to be able to say like, yes, we're talking about this 80 years later, but here are things that substantiate the things that this person is saying. Newspapers, from a higher education perspective, let me tell you, I think that student newspapers and yearbooks and things like that end up being this really fascinating, underutilized text, primary text in higher education research. And so I think that, you know, I've done work where I was doing a history of an HSI in Texas. And the student newspapers were really, especially like letters to the editor and reports and accounts of events that were held on campus and stuff like that, were a really great way to look at like what the feeling was of students who were attending this institution in, say, the 1990s and reacting to anti-affirmative action Supreme Court cases and stuff like that. So just fascinating. Diaries, songs, paintings, photographs, letters, speeches, articles of clothing can be considered, artifacts from the time can be considered primary sources. So as you're thinking about it, like, please you can be creative and really span the boundaries of the written word and incorporate other things. Secondary sources can be fantastic to be able to triangulate or to support the argument or the analysis that you're putting forth about the primary source. But historians like the gold standard is being able to look and analyze primary sources. And so identifying sources, for the purposes of this, and we're going to talk about this a bit more over the course of the 8 weeks or 7 weeks now remaining. But you can look at archives and look at university, library, museum archives, and different special collections. The link for Iowa State Library Special Collections and University Archives is right on the homepage. If you see the quick search bar that shows up on the homepage, if you just scroll down, it'll be right under it on the left-hand page. The thing that is really great for the final project is you don't actually have to physically go to the archives. A lot of universities have done great work in digitizing the archives, and so you can look at photos, hear audio files of meetings or lectures or things like that. Like I said, yearbooks, student newspapers, all of that. Some of my colleagues who work at George Mason University have put together this resource. It's the higheredhistory.gmu.edu link. I really encourage you to look at it. If there is actually a link at the top of the page that says primary sources, and they have a lot of higher ed resources and digital archives that they've already located for you. They have finding aids that will separate out text and resources by geographic location, institution name, topic, all sorts of things. And so as you're thinking about it, I'm encouraging folks to look at Iowa State University history if they want to. But if you want to branch out and look at other things, you're more than welcome to. Like I said, the only stipulation that I had in terms of the final project was that it had to be something about the history of higher education in the US. So when you go to the archives in Canvas, there is a short reading. It's probably only 5 or 6 pages long. It is a very easy read. It's by Jordan Humphrey. It's a book chapter about going to the archives and what you would need to do if you want to do in-person research. And so she does things like talk about what you can bring with you. You cannot actually bring pens with you into an archive. A lot of the archives that I have been to, they will not allow you to bring a backpack with you. Like, they will have lockers that you can put your stuff in. You can't bring food or drink. In the top picture on this slide, you can see that the women are wearing gloves. That can actually be pretty standard in archives, depending on the age and the condition of what it is that you're looking at. And so if you do want to go to the archives in person, let me know, and I'm happy to walk you through that. Essentially, what you'll need to do is usually make an appointment with a special collections rep or an archivist that will have finding aids and things like that, especially if you're working with a big collection of documents. You might have to request boxes that have the artifacts or the articles or whatever it is that you want to look at. I've gone to the archives and said, like, especially like politicians, for instance, the governors, whoever might have a long long finding aid, lots of boxes and stuff like that that have been organized thematically or what have you by time period and stuff like that. And so an archivist might have to go to a storage facility or request stuff to be brought on site if they have an off-site warehouse. And you need to know what you're looking for, or at least have it narrowed down to boxes and whatnot. And then there's some different rules about going into the archives about the woman in the top picture who's actually looking at stuff is laying her folder flat. They will ask you to do that and to turn like one page at a time, like a book and stuff like that. And so if you want to go to the archives in person, like I said, let me know. I'll be happy to coach you through that. But some things that are essential items would be pencils, notebook or paper to be able to take notes, digital camera, laptop or tablet. Normally what I do is I take my iPad in there and I use that as my camera to be able to take photographs of it. If you want like a really funny little anecdote for going to the archives, when I was a master's student, so this would have been 2007, and collecting the data that became my master's thesis, digital cameras were a thing that you could take to the archives, but the archive that I went into was going to charge you per picture the same fee that they would charge you if you were going to use a copy machine, and it was like 25 cents a page. And being a rather broke college student or grad student, I could not afford to do that. And so I, over the course of like 3 or 4, like full, like 8 to 5 days, I literally hand copied all of the letters that I was using from the archives. And so by the end of the day, it was like my hand was just like this lobster claw. And yeah, I don't think I've written that much in the 14 years, 15 years since, but a lot of archives are not like that. I think the other thing that I will say is that if you are ever looking at doing historical or archival research, make friends with whoever. I mean, Timmy, I kind of had a moment with that too. It's fair. But I would say if you are looking at doing historical work in your own scholarship, make best friends with the special collections person or with the archives, with the archivist at the library. I think that what is amazing is that most archives and special collections, especially at universities, are just these treasure troves of information, of documents, of artifacts that most people don't even scratch the surface of. They might be familiar with other collections and other things that might be of interest to you. The last time that I went into an archive was November 2019. I went into an archive at Texas A&M Kingsville, which is in deep South Texas, and I was the only one who was in there. There was an archivist who was not only like, hey, have you thought about this? Like, do you want to look at the finding aids for this other collection that might be useful to you? But he was even showing me like artwork and stuff like that that is in the special collections that hardly anybody else ever gets to see. So make best friends with your librarian / special collections rep / archivist. It's well worth it. So let's say you've gone to the archives or the digital or in person, and you have found a document or found an artifact that you are interested in, and speak to whatever your subject of interest is. And so some questions that you would ask yourself along the way are, what is the authenticity of the source? What's the authenticity of the author? If you have things that were written anonymously, then what sort of context clues can you provide or glean about who they are and what their expertise is, what their perspective is, what their position to be able to speak on whatever subject it is. When the source was created, how much time has passed between the event and the creation of the source. Again, like if it's, to the example I gave earlier, if it's 80 years later, that doesn't necessarily make it less valid. I think it just means that there might be some other sort of detective work that you have to do to find other sources. And then I think key questions in the analysis process is what is included in the document or artifact that you found and what is not included. And that's not, I'm not just saying that as terms of missing information. I think that even in general qualitative research, like if you're interviewing someone, we're taught that you should think about the silences, the awkward pauses, the things that people may not want to talk about, the ways that they might pivot to another subject or they might avoid subjects altogether. And so to a certain extent, you're kind of doing that with artifacts as well. So you're assuming that these are man-made artifacts and maybe they're not the most reliable or the most inclusive of all the information that you need. And so to what extent can you think about what else should have been talked about or hasn't been talked about or what's left out of the document? Sometimes it can be just as illuminating what's not on the page as what's on the page. And then as you are gathering more and more documents, you're looking at how did things speak to one another. So, for example, I brought up the student newspapers and op-ed pages. I mean, I can literally tell you about conversations that college students have had in the like editorial op-ed pages of their student newspapers where students might be yelling at each other about the virtues of, say, affirmative action or why they're against it and why and stuff like that, and that they're just responding to each other. So like in what ways can you put artifacts, documents, whatever, in conversation to each other and in conversation with each other, and to say like how do they agree, how do they disagree, what is other information I need to know, what is informative and useful about documents, and what else do I need to know is just always a great question to ask yourself about these texts. And so I'm providing you with a template for how you can go about doing the document analysis. And I will go ahead and reattach it. Timmy, I think I might have attached these to the chat right before you came in. So let me just make sure it is accessible. So I have put a document analysis template in there. This is a very basic one. You can change it according to your needs. It's something that you can absolutely use in the final project if it suits you. If not, I think that what can just be helpful is if you are trying to track a lot of documents or a lot of things, this can help. It's almost like a built-in analysis / memo template that you can use in the analysis process to track your thoughts and things like that. And so again, the goal of this sort of document analysis is to think about what a document does or doesn't say and how it illustrates things like time, place, context, speaker, author, whatever, in the context of when it was created. And so something that I'm doing here, I have completely, well, not completely, but mostly decontextualized a document that is in the chat. It's called the document analysis practice document, I think is what it's called. It's the first thing that I attached. So I've removed the authors, the publication date, you get the title and that's it. And then it is the preamble to this document. So I'm going to set a timer for about 6 minutes. I just put that in the sweet spot. You don't necessarily have to read this exhaustively, but it's just an opportunity to practice some of this and be a little bit more hands-on. If you want to use the document analysis template, you're more than welcome to. I mean, it's a Word document, so you can mark it up however you want. And then, like I said, I will set a timer and then we can come back together in about 6 minutes just to discuss. Sound good? I'm going to turn off my camera, but I'm going to leave the sound on just so y'all can hear the timer when it goes off. So we will start again in a minute or in 6. We have about 1 minute. It was loud. All right. So again, if you haven't read this exhaustively, please don't worry about it. That's not the purpose. If you find it interesting, I can share with you a longer version of this. But so like I said, I have purposely decontextualized this document. So if you had to guess anything about the author, the purpose, the date, where it was created, what would you guess?
I'm just guessing. I mean, they mentioned the university, so I mean, it feels like it would be maybe a letter to the editor at a school paper,
Okay.
or an opinion page authored by, somebody who works for the paper.
Okay.
If I had to guess, it's been within the last 20 years or so.
Okay.
And the author is more than likely self-identified as Chicano.
Mhm.
That's the first glance,
Yeah. Yeah.
trying to read into it as much as I can.
All right. Anybody else? Anybody else want to guess? Thank you, Jess.
I was going to say a couple of things stood out to me in the article. The first thing that caught my notice was they mentioned time of Renaissance. So for me, that immediately made my mind jump to like a civil rights movement. So like the 1960s era, because I believe that was when the Chicano movement was big in the US, kind of overlapping. And also at the end, kind of moving in the same direction, that it looked like they were addressing someone within higher education, but I feel like they may have been addressing someone at an administrative level where they expected them to have responsibility for addressing these issues.
Mm-hmm. What about location? Does anybody have any guesses on location?
Doesn't the title kind of give it away?
It does.
Yeah,
Where
Santa
would you
Barbara.
guess? Yep, Santa
Like
Barbara.
an institution in, is that California?
Yep. It sure is. Anything else that stood out to y'all about what the document is about or anything like that?
Maybe a proposal for a multicultural center, maybe?
Maybe. I'll tell you in a minute. Okay, so what kind of, so something to think about is, with your final project, I'm kind of sending y'all into the archives to find a project. And so let's say you are sitting in an archive and you come across a document like this. What could you maybe use this for?
As far as what kind of research, or
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it would be a good, I mean, it's a good vignette for sure, that you could, cite to strengthen a topic on, cultural. I don't want to like use the exact words, but cultural renaissance, that they are, and like I think Kyla said, if it wasn't you, I apologize, about the maybe in response to a multicultural student center or something like that. It's a very good and very photographic, it feels like a very photographic snapshot of what things were like at Santa Barbara at this point in time.
Yeah.
And so I think it would be a really good point to throw in, if you're just talking about like Chicano culture, as it pertains to college students, it'd be a good vignette. I don't know if that's close to what you're asking for, or
No, you're doing great. Don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah, you're doing great. Okay, so thank you all for that. So, they're did pretty good job. So, I've said like, what assumptions, what struck you in the document. So this is an excerpt from a document called the Plan de Santa Barbara. So this was created in 1969. So Kyla, you were right about that, the Chicano movement of the civil rights movement. The
The
group,
decades threw me off.
it's no problem. This was let me just say, this was like deliberately meant to trip you up. I
That's fair.
wiped a lot of information off of this.
That's fair.
This was written by a student collective called the Chicano Coordinating Council on Higher Education. They weren't necessarily based in Santa Barbara, California. They were meeting there at least. This was a bunch of students from California writ large. What this is this is the preamble to what they called a master plan for Chicano higher education. And so that is what they're talking about. And this is something that was created at the height of the Chicano movement of the 1960s and 70s. And so, yeah, this is, something that I am using and writing about and thinking about just in terms of the context in which it was created, what it says, what that says about the time, and the kind of ways that this can be used as a blueprint or a jumping off point for what a master plan might look like 50 years later, or now I guess 53 years later. So that's something that I'm using and kind of why it was at the top of my mind and why I decided to use it for right now. So this is just a snapshot of one way to do a document analysis. I know I have given you this template that you can always use as a way to think about what the document says, to do a close reading of what it says or maybe what it doesn't say, to make notes about what was maybe going on in the context of when something was created, who created it, when it was produced, like where you found it, and all of these different things. And then overall, that corroboration can help you to make connections across sources, whether to figure out how they support each other or how they might differ from one another. And so, are there any questions about this lesson or anything like that, or the class in general?
I had a quick question about just the discussion boards in general. I feel like I remember hearing it mentioned that we're supposed to like respond to a question in the discussion board as well as respond to like the original post. So there should be
Yes.
2 responses from us. Is that right?
Not necessarily. And it's not necessarily about, it's neither right nor wrong. One of the things that is tricky in some of these online classes is that when I've tried to put students into smaller groups that have like 4 or 5 people, it gets tricky if you have like 1 or 2 people who are really proactive and want to respond, and they respond earlier in the week, and then nobody else looks at the discussion until Sunday at 10 p.m. or something. And by that point, it's too late to have a robust discussion. The trade-off with what I'm doing in this class is that there are a lot of you. And so I think that the thread can just get really like big really quickly. But let me say, I'm really excited about just how interactive y'all have been so far. In terms of individually, do you necessarily need to start with my question or respond to my question? Like, no, not necessarily, especially if the conversation has moved on since then, or kind of morphed into something else. And so what I would say is just get a sense of where the conversation is. If you feel really compelled to answer my original question, by all means do so. The whole exercise of ending your response with another question is just a means to try to keep the conversation going. And so I encourage that, but it's not required. Essentially, I just want to see more than anything the quality of the responses and the thoughtfulness and that you're engaging with it. So if you don't answer my question, but you still are adding something new or something interesting to the conversation, then that's fantastic. I think I just try to give you some sort of safety net so you don't just feel like you're just responding to everybody and nobody at the same time, if that makes sense. Is that helpful, Bethany? Okay. All right. And if you have any questions, I will say so far I've gotten a few questions about the discussion board, and I feel like everybody's doing just fine. I'm really happy with it. So do the best you can. And you know, if I think that there's something that needs to be improved on your end in terms of the responses, that's something I'll let you know in the feedback on the assignment. And I don't mean that as like you're going to get a lower grade. I will just make that comment privately to you of hey, you know, if you could add more or try directly responding to a question or something like that. Okay, well, we are up to 6:01. I appreciate you hanging out with me and being patient with the delay as I was not transferring, as I was transitioning. I'm tired to a second meeting or from another meeting. So thank you for that. I promise to be done as close to 6 o'clock as possible. We are at 6:01. So if you don't have any questions, if you feel good for the night, thank you for coming. I appreciate your time and your energy. If you have any questions or want to talk privately, I'll be on here for another couple minutes. So thank y'all and have a great night.